Greetings, pals, and welcome to Fly's Flight Academy. My name is Kavakas, otherwise known as Flyteco on Four, and today we're going to be continuing on with our ship breakdowns. Today we're going to be starting to look at our bombers, and explicitly we're going to be looking at the Rampart. I'm doing these kind of out of order, mostly because I believe that they all fill different roles, and I kind of want to go in order of importance. In terms of a domination perspective, in TDM, they all kind of fill the same role to a degree, but for the most part, because bombers are so much more prevalent in domination, I'm going to be treating them as if domination was the only game mode currently, and I'm going to be kind of going at them in that way. So I'm going to be starting with the Rampart, then going to the War Carrier, and then the Sledgehammer. In my opinion, this is an order of importance in terms of like what is the most useful to a team, or what's most broadly useful to a team, I should say. And then it kind of gets narrower and narrower as you go down the other two. Starting with the Rampart, looking at its components, in your primary weapon slot, you actually have two very solid options. Unfortunately, the laser cannon graces us with its presence once again. Oh, sorry, I forgot. My apologies. I forgot to do the introduction for the ship. This ship is actually commonly run as a quote-unquote point shield. It mostly is focused on heavily... Sorry, the bomber is mostly focused on heavy zone control, as it has double mines in both secondary and system slots to lay around any point of interest that your team needs. That's what I was saying when I mean point shield. It's kind of your designating an area that your team wants to keep kind of turtled in, and the Rampart will just put mines all over it, and that's essentially what it does. And now moving on to its primary weapons. We have two slot options in the heavy laser and light lasers. These are very personal preference. I have a surprising amount of friends that played gunships, or not gunships, sorry, that played bombers way like super consistently and did well. A lot of them had super different preferences for the same thing though. A decent chunk of them went heavy, a decent chunk of them went light laser. So I do sincerely believe that these are a lot more to personal preference. As such, I personally use heavy laser. I'm going to talk about heavy laser a lot in the bomber reviews because they're on just about every bomber, I believe. As such, they're particularly nice just because they provide that extra bit of range and kind of burst damage to hold your enemies away from the point that you're defending. So it lets you kind of sit safely back on your point and just shoot off of it. These don't have the extreme range that they do on like the strikes. They're not in that 7,000 range. They're pretty close. In fact, I've never actually checked the difference. Okay, yeah, I was correct. It's like a 1,000 meter difference. So they're not super, super long range, but they're still in that mid-long range kind of class. So they're still there to fill the similar role. With this particular cannon, there's a particular patrol pattern that I'm gonna go over with both of these. So with the heavy lasers in particular, essentially what you're gonna want to do is you want to slowly patrol around your point, kind of consistently slowing down for the 180 degrees facing between point B and the enemy spawn, not yours. So essentially, once you're perpendicular to B on the inside of the point. So if you're on A side, for example, it's essentially facing to it's facing to the left, and from C it's facing to the right, or vice versa, depending on how the map is laid out. Going to their spawn, and then kind of continuing on a little bit past that. You want to kind of slow down when you're going past that, and then speed up on the other half of the point, and then slow down. That way you have that full window where you're moving slowly to A, spot enemies, and B, it gives you the potential to kind of fire pot shots as you're continuing your patrol path. So if you do spot an enemy, but they're far enough away that they're kind of just teetering on the heavy laser range, you can kind of take a couple shots at them and continue your path. And as they get slightly closer, you'll be able to speed up and kind of whip back around to actually fully engage the enemy if they actually commit to your point. For your tier 4 and tier 5, you're going to be taking Ignore Armor. That's pretty much a staple of the heavy laser at this point. And Shield Piercing. These are just solid options for the heavy laser, always have been, and still will continue to be. For the light laser, these are a less common option between the two, because you do lose the extra range and safety that the heavy lasers give you, but you regain power in point looping people. So what that means is, if you pick the heavy lasers, you're going to want to place your mines kind of evenly to bait people, that way they think like, oh, I can attack the point and won't take too much damage. And then as they get to your point, you actually hunt them down and kind of chase them around the point. And if they disengage off of your point, you kind of disengage and stick to the point and kind of shadow them until they come back to the point. The one main issue that light lasers actually have is gunships. You don't have the range to contest gunships, so trying to fight with one being present is a bit difficult, as you're kind of restricted to the side that the gunship isn't looking at. That said, you can still play around it and be totally fine. And there's even a secondary way to use these, where you sit in a cubby kind of opposite side of the point from the enemy spawn, and place all your mines in the cubby with you. And then when an enemy comes to fight you, you make sure you're facing towards where you believe that they would engage you from, and they should get hit by your mines first, and then you proceed to clean them up with the light lasers. For your tier 4 and tier 5, you're going to be taking increased firing arc and tracking for tier 4 and increased hull damage for tier 5. This just aids you in consistency and that little bit of extra damage to help finish people. Moving on to secondary weapons, this bomber pretty much exclusively relies on its mines. I know protons are in here, but on this particular bomber, it's not a good option in the slightest. You have two really strong mine options. In fact, this is the only bomber that comes with seismic mines, I'm fairly certain. Just checking now to be safe. Yes, it is the only bomber that comes with seismic mines. Unfortunately, this is to preface this, seismic mines in SWTOR don't have the same loud, cool sound that Boba Fett's have. I know, I'm sad about it too. But because I'm going to go at these in order of A, appearance, and B, honestly, strength. Seismic mines are significantly stronger than Seekers on this particular bomber, just because it has really good synergy with its system mines. So we're going to be talking about it first. Like I said, these are exclusive to this bomber, and through the entirety of leveling this mine, you will only ever have one seismic mine. Meaning there is no upgrade that gives you the ability to place two. There's no point in time you gain a second one. You're limited to one. So what you should do with it is you need to place it closer to whichever mine that you believe you need to place it closer to whichever mine you believe an enemy would actually hit. And this is essentially going to be comboing this mine with the other mine's damage to potentially one-shot your enemy. And that's more often than not the hope, is that you straight up just kill them with the seismic and some other mine. Realistically, that doesn't happen too often, but it can, and that's kind of what you're looking for. It does fewer hull damage, so it has some pretty nasty combo potential, as I said, with the other mines that you place. Or if you have a secondary Rampart on your team, you can layer the two seismic mines for even more burst, because it'll hit people for a truck ton of damage, and there's really not much you can do against it. So aside from just practicing caution and not flying towards the mine. EMPs are EMPs are always the bane of mines or of bombers' existences, but in particular for the Rampart, if you're running seismic mines, they are actually super detrimental to you, because if you just place a seismic and it gets cleared by EMP, you're gonna have to wait a good 15 seconds before you can place another one, and in that 15 seconds, there's the potential for you to die. So you really had to be a lot more careful with how you place these seismic mines. Of note, the for your tier 4 and tier 5, for tier 4, it's kind of a simple choice. You're really going to take increased radius just to help you be able to combo a little bit easier, because it is only a 1500 meter range or a 1500 meter radius at which these will detonate. So pushing that out to that extra 2000 will actually help you a significant amount. That said, it does explode to 3000 meters around it instead of that 2000, so it does do extra damage around the enemy and a little bit past them after they detonate it. For tier 5, you're actually going to take Hull Resonance. The crit chance here can work, but because of the way it works, it's kind of awkward to use crit. Realistically speaking, the chances you critting on a mine, just because they have a decently long cooldown, isn't good. You're not really like kind of stacking the percent in your favor here, because for crit mines you really want to run things that give you crit bonuses, but since this is the only one you have, there's really no reason to run it. I don't believe any other mine benefits from crit either, so it's not amazing. I could be wrong. One of the system mines potentially has it. No, okay, I was right. None of the other mines benefit from crit. So realistically, you take Hull Resonance. This is just a bleed for more hull damage. It's 15% of your initial damage. So it's like, I believe it brings your damage pretty close to 700. It's like 600 and something weird like that. But it aids in that one shot. So it's nice. Nice little burn. And it'll help people to not regenerate health, or to force them to use a heal to save themselves, which is honestly the main goal of most bleeds in GSF. Moving on to your second options, we have Seeker Mines. These are practically universal to every bomber except the Sledgehammer, and they are decent when used correctly. I say that because these mines don't trigger like other mines. When these trigger, they will essentially go chase enemies like a missile, and as such, they can actually be dodged with engine abilities just like missiles. So you kind of have to be a little wary about what enemies, or about how you place these, because you don't want an enemy eating all three of, or two to three of your Seeker mines, and then just engine abilitying away, and suddenly you're out of mines. So you really need to space these a little bit. But your best practice with the Seeker mines is to honestly place them extremely close to your point, but not in the same spot. So you kind of want to spread them around the point. That way, it's not quite clear for your enemies, so they're forced to actually charge in and burn their energy, and to burn their energy for their engine ability, or they just take a big chunk of damage, and it can potentially kill them, because each Seeker mine does 756 on impact. So you figure at tier 5 you can have 3 of these. It can do a significant chunk of damage. So I want to say that's what, 2100? Yeah, it's 2100 burst, not including your other mines. It's pretty good damage if you can pull them off. As I stated, early on with leveling, you only have 2 mines, so you'll just have to be pretty clever with how you place them to get some decent mileage. But with that said, it's not too bad. For your tier 4, this is pretty much always going to be standard. You want to take increased speed. This is for the reasoning of you want the mine to hit before the enemy has a chance to use their engine ability. There is the philosophy that this used to be the same philosophy for missiles or for like proton and thermite way back in the day. But those changed because those have predictable lock timers, and people got used to how they need to dodge those particular things. With seeker mines, you kind of have a really short window to disengage, and if you speed up that window and make it really short, it becomes very hard to counter, and the mines can just do their full damage a lot quicker. And proximity radius with how you're using these isn't actually important. Um, they are they already have 4,000 meter range anyways, and since you're placing them on a point, you're forcing the enemy to get within that range anyways. At least that's the insinuation that you're trying to do. So you're really not too worried about how far they can track or how far they'll proc on someone. You really just want them to actually hit, so you do need that extra bit of speed. At tier 5, you do have two options. The one you generically take the most is the additional mine. This gives you a third mine, which just lets you place them a little more freely and kind of gives you a little bit more leniency on how you spread them. The other option is a bit more team oriented. If you're going to be running 2 bombers in your squad, and what I mean by squad is 4 people queued together, you can actually take the AoE damage, but you won't always get the most value out of the AoE. It's a fairly short radius, and it honestly it's good for like bombers defending B, or it's better for the bombers that are defending the highly contested points. So it's better for like a more pseudo offensive bomber than it is a truly defensive bomber. Or truly I say bomber, I mean the Rampart in particular. The other bombers have a different way about them, but it's still a good option. 50%. It's not a lot of damage, especially it's about 400-ish, give or take. It's less than 400, but I'm rounding to save myself time. It's not too much damage, is what I'm trying to get across, and that's okay. Realistically speaking, because you're layering these, the AoE damage is more meant for you to combo it with a second bomber and your own system mine. But realistically speaking, I do believe that the additional mine is just strictly better. But of course, I also believe seismic mines is just better as a whole. So I suggest you running seismic, especially since their seismic is just unique to the Rampart. It's kind of a cool option. Moving on to the systems, these are 3 more mine options. These are 2 utility options and a strictly damage option. These are all actually fairly decent options, with the exception of actually the ion mine. It doesn't do enough shield damage to make it worth. I know the reasoning is because you can have 3 of them and you kind of stack them in a way that makes sense, and it'll clear shields, and it does terrible hull damage. Overall, the ion mines, I'm not gonna talk about them just because they're pretty bad. If you do ever run them, you're gonna take the additional mine and reactor disruption. It's just utility options. Again, it's a lot of not great options. Honestly, even I would honestly, I'm gonna change this. I'd argue that the shield drain is better than the reactor disruption, just because it's a 20%er, and multiple of these I don't believe stack the debuff. So you're not really getting 60%, you're just getting 20% 3 times, and that kind of blows. So I'm gonna say the shield drain is better if you're ever gonna use these. But I'm going to actually talk about the one that I believe you should use the most, and that's concussion mines. This is just strictly damage option. It's the concussion missile, but as a mine, and as such, it does slightly less damage. It actually does very similar damage to the concussion missile. It's only 1,000 less. Not 1,000, that would be dramatic. It's only 100 less than the concussion missile. And it has a very similar shield piercing pattern. So it's actually really strong. And paired with the seismic mine, which is doing straight hull damage, and this is shield piercing, it's 20% of practically 1,000 damage. So you're getting at 200 damage through, essentially. It's a nasty burst. And you have two of these at base, which is pretty good. Paired with the seismic mine, you're kind of placing the concussions near the seismic, but not quite on top of it. That way, as an enemy flies through the combo, it's doing damage staggered a little bit. That way, it's bursting in a way that makes a bit more sense. Realistically, you want the seismic to hit first, and then the two concussions, or the reverse of that. It's kind of weird. It takes a bit of practice to understand how to kill people, just because it's a very passive way of killing people. You're not shooting them yourself. You're letting a mine kill them. I believe the correct way is concussion, seismic concussion, but I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I've actually played a bomber, as I hate to admit, or at least the traditional bomber. I've played the sledgehammer a lot, and we'll get into why when we get the sledgehammer video. But concussions are definitely a strong burst. When you get to tier 4, you get your third mine. The increased radius, although nice, and it would bring it into line with that seismic mine, having a third concussion, it just makes your comboing so much easier, because then you can just really surround the seismic mine with as many concussions as possible, and even place one away from it to just help with damage on the other side. At tier 5, you're taking increased hull damage. You would, if you're running the Seeker mines, I actually recommend swapping this to shield damage and placing your concussion mines in a way that they're going to hit before the Seekers, and they'll do a lot of shield damage, and essentially two of them can clear almost any ship's shields. And then your Seekers will actually finish them off. So it's actually still a really deadly combo without using ion mines, which hilariously do less damage than concussions anyways. So there's that. Actually, it's close. I think ions beat it slightly, but like not by much, especially since these don't have a shield damage increase. But if you're running seismic hull damage, if you're running Seeker, run shield. Either way, you're pretty much always going to like one tap people with your mine combos, so it's kind of okay. The other mine is the interdiction mine. This is still a solid choice, as it kind of fits into line with how you want to use your seismics. This is not at all synergized with Seekers, though. I do believe Seekers exclusively work with concussions in a way that makes sense, at least. So, realistically speaking, if you're running interdiction at all, you're still going to be running seismics. That's because, kind of in a similar vein to seismics, you only get one mine when you're starting off with this. And this is more of a utility mine and less so of a straight up damage mine. But what the mine does do is it slows enemies. So when it pops, it's going to slow them down, and that actually gives your seismic, if you place it well enough with your seismic, it lets your seismic hit for sure, rather than potentially missing the full combo and losing out on that seismic damage. So you place these pretty much on top of each other to hide the seismic mine. That way, they get hit by the slow and the seismic and the extra damage all at the same time, and which is pretty solid. At tier 4, however, you do unlock your second mine. I've noted these do have that 1500 proc range, which kind of sucks. The increased range would be nice, but having 2 interdiction mines is actually really good. That means you're able to place one just slightly before the seismic and just slightly after. That way they get slowed into the seismic and slowed out of the seismic. And that more or less is gonna kill them usually. It's less of a straightforward combo than concussion seismic because it's a bit more nuanced in the way it kills someone. You kind of have to play like you kind of have to be a trapper. You have to really like get people to fall for your combo rather than just placing concussions everywhere and hoping the seismic pairs well with one, just kind of pops them. At tier 5, though, you have 2 fairly solid options. You have improved interdiction, which would be nice, but we're really not using these for utility on this ship. Even though that's technically what these are for, we're not using it for that. We actually can take hull resonance, and what that'll do is it'll do 20% extra damage of its initial damage over 6 seconds. It's pretty much the same thing as Seismic Mine. I am fairly certain they stack. I don't know, because I've never actually used this combination myself. At least I haven't in a long time. Just because I do prefer the concussion seismics. A, because you have a lot more mines, and B, because it just feels smoother, in my opinion. But it's dealing an extra, what was it, 20%? Yeah, it's dealing an extra about 100 damage, a little over. So it's bringing it up to that 600 threshold, and it's actually doing pretty, like, it's dealing enough damage, especially with 2 of them. It's 1200 damage if you place them correctly. So it's nothing to scoff at. Still pretty good. And still combos well with Seismic. So that's really the end goal here. We're looking for ways to combo with our heavy hitting mines. Moving on to our shields. You have a couple of options. However, I think there's only really one good one for the way that this plays, and that's Shield Projector. And that's because in these current, well, honestly, just in any meta, this adds a lot of strength to your point control by making your teammates and yourself tankier. If you time the Shield Projector correctly, to turn the tide of a fight by giving your allies the extra bump in shields, and even cleansing them of ion and other related interdiction, yada yada yada, all that kind of jazz effects. Meaning, if your ally was subjected to the dreaded Clarion disables, you can clear them and they can continue fighting normally. That said, actually, that's really it. It's a fairly simple ability. It just takes practice in learning when you should use it. Realistically, you don't want to use it at the start of a fight because it's a shield restore, not a shield increase. So you kind of want to use it a little midway through the fight when you think your allies are getting low. You pop this and give them a nice boost, and then they can continue fighting and overall surviving a little bit better. For your tier 3, you're just going to take increased duration. This means it'll do an extra 16% shield restoration for over 4 seconds. So it's 4% a second. And it's pretty good. Overall, I think Shield Projector is a nice choice. In a different world where you're playing the Rampart greedily, Overcharge technically does the same thing, but just for yourself. But I think in the way that the Rampart is meant to be played, realistically, the Shield Projector is just a better choice. You don't want to be greedy on bombers, as you really aren't playing for yourself. When you're playing as a bomber, you're playing for a team. So there's that. Moving to engines, you actually have 2 really important choices here. This is team reliant, and when I mean team reliant, I mean a lot heavier than most other things that rely on your team. This is essentially whether or not you're going to have an extra hyperspace beacon, and what that means is hyperspace beacons are the things that you spawn off of. So if you common practice is to place a beacon behind points A and C to essentially give you fast access to defending those. and to cut the travel time down from you getting from normal spawn to any point. Realistically, travel time from A and C to B is a lot faster than from either spawn point to B. Um, Actually, that's a bad example. It's fairly equidistant, but from spawn to A or C, it's a lot slower. Certainly, it's just better for anyone to anyone in your team to have beacon. If someone is running a hyperspace beacon, your other choice is interdiction. Of note, if you are taking the hyperspace beacon, I would recommend learning. I suppose I'm not done, so we're not going to continue interdiction. There is an actual learning curve to hyperspace beacon that I need to mention. It's kind of the same as with placing drones and other stationary things like this that you really want to protect. You need to position it well and kind of out of enemy view. Obviously, if your point's getting attacked, the enemy is quickly going to see, hey, our enemies are spawning from over there. There's probably a beacon, and they're going to go clear it pretty swiftly after that. But you want to place it well enough that you can actually take, in your tier 3 option, the hyperspace slingshot. And what this does is, any ally within 3,000 meters of the beacon will receive an extra 15% speed boost. This essentially means when they spawn in, they have that little itty bitty extra bit of speed to help them get away from the beacon and get closer to any of the points or wherever they need to be. The other option is essentially survivability for the beacon, but with positioning, you don't need this. So in the ideal world, you always take the slingshot and give your team that little extra bit of speed. And now moving into the interdiction drive. This is the if your team already has beacons kind of thing, where this is more committing to properly defending a point. The hyperspace beacon is still good for point defense, but it's more so saying I need my team to come in faster. Interdiction drive is saying I'm going to defend the point. Because what interdiction drive does is it gives you a speed increase for 6 seconds, while it reduces all the enemies within 3,000 meter range, their speed and turning rate by 20% at base. As it increases, it goes, you gain an extra 10% speed, and at tier 3, you're going to take improved interdiction, which slows enemies by an extra 10%, meaning there is further 20% speed difference between you and your enemies, going up from a 30%, so there's a 50% speed difference between you and any enemy caught in your interdiction. This is actually a fairly huge slow, and I find that using it as such, just straight up using it to slow people, is really strong. I personally, even though I believe hyperspace is more important, I'm personally not good at placing my beacon, so I've opted to just run interdiction, and I've seen great success with it. On it, if I'm being completely honest, I really wish I was better with beacon, because it is strictly, from a team standpoint, it is strictly better. But I fly solo a lot, so it's kind of okay for me to run interdiction, but not really. It still helps public players to run beacon, but that's neither here nor there. And that is pretty much it for the Rampart. Of note, on just, I don't know why HK is selected. That's probably for a meme. For just about every single bomber, you're actually going to want to run Hydra Spanner. This is because you need that extra bit of survivability, especially on the Rampart where you don't have your own repair beacon or anything like that. You kind of want to survive on the point, and just having a consistent flow of healing from Hydra Spanner is fairly nice. But that is all for the Rampart. Next time when we come back, I will be talking about the War Carrier, the Rampart's drone buddy. It's essentially a different way to defend a point. But when we get to that, we'll get there. So for now, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the skies.